Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course Literature, and today we're going to talk about the poetry of Sylvia Plath. Mr. Green, ugh, I heard she's like the patron saint of sad teenage girls. Well, me from the past. Once again, you're prejudging an author based on what you've heard rather than what you've actually read. I know this because I used to be you, and I am keenly aware of the fact that you have not actually read Sylvia Plath. So let's actually read some poems before trying to convince everyone about how smart we are. So Sylvia Plath is often described as a feminist poet, writing about the plight of women before women's rights were a mainstream idea. Like essayist Thomas McClanahan wrote, "At her brutal best," and Plath is a brutal poet, "she taps a source of power that transforms her poetic voice into a raving avenger of womanhood and innocence." And you thought the Hulk was the only raving avenger. No, there is also the Plath! And there's no question that Plath's feminism is extremely important to her poetry, but she also wrote about a lot of day-to-day experiences and made them significant through her use of metaphor and simile. Former American poet laureate Robert Pinsky said her poems throw off images and phrases with the energy of a runaway horse or a machine with its throttle stuck wide open. So let's talk about Sylvia Plath's biography in the thought bubble. Plath was born in 1932 in Boston. Her father was an entomologist and wrote a book about bees, which would be the subject of many of Plath's later poems. Her mom was a first-generation American pursuing a master's in teaching. When she met Plath's father, Sylvia published her first poem at the age of 8. Her father died that same year. She was a good student and attended Smith College and was awarded a summer internship at Mademoiselle magazine. The internship was the inspiration for her wonderful novel, The Bell Jar. She said she looked back at the experience as though looking through a bell jar, which distorted it into a work of fiction. In real life, Plath's first suicide attempt was in 1953. She crawled underneath her house and took her mother's sleeping pills and said later that she was blissfully succumbed to the whirling blackness that I honestly believed was eternal oblivion. But she survived and graduated from Smith, and then went on to win a Fulbright scholarship to study at the University of Cambridge, where she met Ted Hughes, a poet whose work she admired. They married a few months later and found a mutual interest in astrology and the supernatural, and a mutual admiration for each other's work. In 1962, Plath discovered that Hughes was having an affair, and they separated. Later that year, she experienced a creative burst and wrote a book's worth of poems, and then in February of 1963, she took her own life. She was only 30. Okay, so Sylvia Plath became the first person to posthumously win a Pulitzer Prize for Poetry for her book, The Collected Poems, published in 1981. But she's best known for Ariel, a collection of poems written in something of a poetic frenzy in the months before she died and published in 1965. Sylvia Plath wrote in her journal once that she felt as though she lived in two extremes, joyous positive and despairing negative. And we see both in her poems. Like in Letter in November, she gives us a glimpse of the joyous positive. "I am flushed and warm. I think I may be enormous. I am so stupidly happy." And we've all felt puffed up with happiness, and she finds brilliant words to describe the feeling just as it is. Sylvia Plath was influenced by writers like James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, D.H. Lawrence, but also by Emily Dickinson. And if you watched our episode on Dickinson last year, you'll see that influence. They both share a preoccupation with death, but they also both write from the perspective of women who find themselves trapped by lack of opportunity. So along with poets like Robert Lowell and Anne Sexton, Plath is often seen as a member of the confessional school of poetry. I think Sylvia Plath often gets a bad rap precisely because her poetry resonates with teenagers, and I think it's a little bit unfair. Yes, there are times when she romanticizes death and self-injury, and I don't like it when she does that. But there's astonishing emotional authenticity in her poems, and she manages it without irony. And that incredible frankness in Plath's writing is what I think makes it endure. It all feels true. Her focused observation of the world around her, the pupil that has to take everything in, that was a great gift to us, because by keeping her eyes open as long as she did, she helped us to keep ours open. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.